Hi, I'm Sheila Bender, talking to you from my studio, making a video for 11 stories. This one is on endings. It's the first part of a two-part series. I think we'll have fun. I prepared this document that I will read from and you can see, and hope that I can make my points. We have to leave a story of any length, both satisfied and wishing the story will stay with us. Having fallen in love with the protagonists or having been at least drawn close to their situations, we will wish to carry the characters inside ourselves as if they are friends we know we won't see again, perhaps for a long time, perhaps never, people who have moved away and gone on with their lives. But their intersection with our life has proved fruitful. We want the impact they have had on us to linger. We want to feel that their lives have shape. We pick up on seeds planted in the very opening of the stories, seeds that might not have been planted until drafts later, but seeds that must be there for the ending to feel satisfactory. You probably already know now as writers that we come to some surprising endings and surprise ourselves, which is a good sign, but that might require that we go back to the beginning to figure out what seeds have to be there. So we're going to look at beginnings and at endings from two novels that I admire. But let's take a little side trip into more about endings. Just as a story must start when something is about to happen, a story must end on something having happened. Whether that is an action of the plot or a changed perception on the part of a protagonist or a combination of the two. And there's a wonderful summary of a story's satisfying ending at a website called creativewritingnow.com/story endings. And you can read more about it there. But here's some 4 points that they make. Effective endings show or suggest the result of the story's conflict. Effective story endings come from the main character's actions. Satisfying stories use elements from the story's beginning and middle. And great story endings make the reader feel something. So now we're going to look at these beginning and endings from the novels that I have selected. One of my favorite novels, especially as a writer, there we are, is Intrusions by Ursula Heggie. And in this book, there is the story of an author who is a mother and wife, and her novel's protagonist, who is also a mother and a wife, and each one of them intrudes on the other's life. Because of their interactions with one another, the story becomes a revelation about women and the choices they make in life. What's interesting is this approach to having the author be a character who is creating a character who is creating the author. So when we read the ending, well, what I'm saying is before we read the ending, we have to go to the beginning. So in the ending, the protagonist, Megan, is returning home to her children and her husband from 2 weeks away. But look at the beginning. Here's the beginning. Megan Stone was walking along the deserted beach. You will probably ask, the author is asking, or telling us we'll ask, you form, which we've studied before. You will probably ask, why another book about another woman walking along the beach? Another deserted beach, to be more specific. And you will sigh impatiently, wondering how soon Megan is going to arrive at something monumental. An insight which will liberate her dramatically from her husband, the demands of her children, and the 80 or 90 Christmas cards she feels obligated to send every year. An insight which will leave her alone in the open-ended situation that could lead anywhere, not excluding nowhere. So we're being told as readers what we're going to be thinking and our impatience and what we're going to expect to happen. You could go on to other possibilities, she continues, but in reality, the reality within this novel, Megan Stone's hair is short and not blonde, but rather a sort of red, too light to be called auburn, the kind of red that usually goes with sunburned skin. She is only 29 and she has never had a lover, neither younger nor older, not even before she married Nick Stone. Later, when she had been married several years, she found herself cautiously wondering what it would have been like, mildly resenting the disadvantage of not having any basis for comparison. It made her uncomfortable to realize that she still harbored the old but well-worn double standard, that it was all right for a boy but not for a girl. 8 years ago, when she had married Nick, she had actually been glad that he had gathered experience, while she had been in a condition referred to by her Aunt Judy as clean. What we have here is the introduction of characters and a situation. We have the author, we have Megan Stone, the protagonist, we have her husband Nick, and we have a character called Aunt Judy who seems to have some influence. And then the part of the beginning that I am talking to you from goes on to have this little piece. Perhaps you would like me in the role of a writer who does not interrupt, who presents slice of life without interferences, without calling attention to the fact that this is a story. I won't accept this role. So we know a lot about Megan. She's inexperienced sexually until marriage. She's unsettled. She has an aunt who has a very strict opinion about what is appropriate for women. And we have an author who's very rebellious to us as readers. Now, let's get to the ending and see how this is using seeds from the beginning that I just read to you. So at this point in the ending, Megan is returning from a 2-week trip to visit Aunt Judy and has decided she can work on changing the way she performs her role and that her marriage will work for her. So remember, our author told us what we'd be expecting, this insight that's monumental and frees her from her children and husband, but that's not the way it's going to go. So it doesn't look like it's going to go that way. And here's the ending. As she felt the wheels separate from the runway, the tickling in her stomach expanded into a moment of queasiness. She swallowed and it went away. This was always the worst part, taking off. Once she was up, she was fine. She looked at her wristwatch. In Boston, she'd have 50 minutes to catch the Delta flight to Connecticut. By the time she landed in Hartford, it would be 5:30, dusk. Instead of calling Nick from the airport, she'd rent a car and drive home. She sees the lights in her house from the end of the street. Lights in the living room and den, lights in the kitchen where Nick and the children would be sitting at the table eating dinner. She'd knock once, or maybe she'd walk to the front door, unlock it quietly, and come in through the living room. There'd be a warm fire in the fireplace, toys on the rug in front of it. Standing in the kitchen door, she'd look at them for a few moments. Then Timmy would notice her. Jumping up from the table, he'd run to her and she'd kneel down, catching him against herself with one arm, holding the other wide open for Nicole. Closing her eyes, she took a deep breath. She could almost smell their fine hair, feeling their soft faces against hers. Nick would get up and she opened her eyes. There she was, doing it again, imagining things ahead of time, painting details of a homecoming that might never be matched by reality. She looked out of the small window. Beyond her reflection, she could see at a distance a long, curved stretch of sand, and at the end of it, the great point light. Although it didn't seem deceptively close, it didn't look too far for someone determined to reach it, someone who'd ignored the faded signs threatening prospective intruders, someone who'd loosened the nails one by one and remove the weathered boards. Okay, she's catching herself in an act and trying to realize that although she's determined to reach the light, the way she gets there might be different. We have the children, we have Nick, we have the protagonist, and we know she's coming home from Aunt Judy's. So all those characters that were there at the beginning, or mentioned as in children, here they are at the end, in her thoughts and in her feelings. So this ending accounts for the characters introduced at the opening. I think it's important to note that the third-person limited point of view, Megan's, is how the book ends, while it opens with the author's point of view in the you form. Here the author doesn't interrupt. She lets Megan have her thoughts at the end. I think it is possible that in doing so, the author becomes her character or admits that she has invented a character to learn more about herself. So just as the ending reaches back to the opening, it also allows for the feeling that a new page is being turned for both the author and the woman she has drawn to engage with. I find this a miraculous sleight of hand and one that is very satisfying as an ending and draws me closer. First in the beginning as the you the author is addressing, and then at the ending following this main character who I have come to believe has influenced the author. So now we're going to go on and read from and study the beginnings and endings of another one of my very favorite novels. This one is All My Puny Sorrows by a Canadian author, Miriam Toews. Okay, there it is. It's a wonderful book. So here's the opening from pages 1 and 2. This book takes place in Ontario in a Mennonite town. The main character is actually a writer of young adult books. She's a younger sister of the other character who's the main character, who's Elfrida, her older sister, who she adores. Elfrida is a very troubled, fabulous pianist and very depressed. And her sister fears, through the whole book, losing her. Our house was taken away on the back of a truck one afternoon, late in the summer of 1979. My parents and my older sister and I stood in the middle of the street and watched it disappear, a low-slung bungalow made of wood and brick and plaster, slowly making its way down First Street, past the A&W and the deluxe bowling lanes, and out onto the number 12 highway, where we eventually lost sight of it. I can still see it, said my sister Elfrida repeatedly, until finally she couldn't. I can still see it. I can still see it. I can still... Okay, nope, it's gone, she said. My father had built it himself, back when he had a new bride, both of them barely 20 years old, and a dream. My mother told Elfrida and me that she and my father were so young and so exploding with energy that on hot evenings, just as soon as my father had finished teaching school for the day and my mother had finished baking and everything else, they'd go running through the sprinkler in their new front yard, whooping and leaping, completely oblivious to the stares and consternation of their older neighbors, who thought it unbecoming of a newly married Mennonite couple to be cavorting, half-dressed, in full view of the entire town. Years later, Elfrida would describe the scene as my parents' La Dolce Vita moment and the sprinkler as their Trevi fountain. Where's it going? I asked my father, who stood in the center of the road. The house was gone. My father made a visor with his hand to block the sun's glare. I don't know, he said. He didn't want to know. Elfrida and my mother and I got into our car and waited for my father to join us. He stood looking at the emptiness for what seemed like an eternity to me. Elfrida complained that the backs of her legs were burning up in the hot plastic seat. Finally, my mother reached over and honked the horn, only slightly, not enough to startle my father, but to make him turn and look at us. All right, we've got the narrator, we've got her sister Elfrida, we've got the mom, we've got the dad, we know the pressures of living in a Mennonite home, and we know that something is disappearing. In this case, the house, but as you read on, you notice a lot other things are disappearing too. The novel is a narrator's retelling of her sister's depression and ultimate suicide. It is the telling of what it is like to live under Mennonite paternalistic doctrine and escape it, what it is like to love one's sibling ferociously, what it is like to carve out a career as a writer, to be a mother, to mourn an unsavable sister. Ultimately, it is a book about surviving grief. Along the way, there is humor shared between the sisters and insights gained from writing. So even though I have told you the gist of the book, it is so well worth reading. The way this writer comes at things the way you would imagine a young adult writer would do, the way she sees the world, her her ferocious love of her sister, what it means to escape an oppressive and paternalistic society, are all in there and so vibrantly portrayed. I see I have a typo, so I am going to fix it right in front of you. So here are excerpts from the last 10 pages of the novel, in which the narrator is writing a letter to her now deceased sister, catching her up on events. One of the strategies of therapists who talk with people about grieving is to write letters, is to engage with the lost person so that you still feel their spirit and feel a sense of completion. Dear Elf, Auntie Tina once told me that I'd be walking down the street one day and suddenly feel a lightness come over me, a feeling like I could walk forever, some magical strength, and that would mean I was being forgiven. I wish I had taken you to Zurich. I'm sorry. Auntie Tina said one day I'd be flying and not even know it. Doesn't that kind of echo the opening of the house going down the road and we don't know to where, but it's leaving? The letter goes on to recount current activities. Here's one that takes place on a trip to New York. Will carried Nora on his back and zoomed around on the sidewalk, and she laughed and bounced up and down and lost one of her flip-flops, so we had to go back and retrace our steps in the dark, which I suppose is the meaning of life. This is the sister talking about her children on a visit, their grown children, and using her sensibilities to create incredible metaphors as she does all the book through. We had to retrace our steps in the dark, which I suppose is the meaning of life. And she's already said she wishes she had taken her sister to Zurich. So in order to look into the dark, which is what our protagonist, the sister, has done, we must go back to find what is lost. And that is what the book is, a going back to find what she has lost. And in And in recounting another conversation, the narrator addresses grief in the letter by recounting a conversation with her mother, who was in the hospital recovering from an operation. I asked her what to do when a spade isn't a spade, and she told me that sometimes there are things like that in life, spades that aren't spades, and that we can leave them that way. I told her, but I'm a writer. It's hard for me to leave those spades so undefined. And she said she understood. She liked mysteries to be solved too, God knows, and words to be attached to feelings. She tapped her whodunit, the one lying on her chest, the one protecting her heart, that somehow with all of this hugging hadn't moved an inch. She told me that the brain is built to forget things as we continue to live, that memories are meant to fade and disintegrate, that skin so protective in the beginning because it has to be to protect our organs sags eventually because the organs aren't so hot anymore either, and sharp edges become blunt, that the pain of letting go of grief is just as painful or even more painful than the grief itself. It means goodbye. It means going to Rotterdam when you weren't expecting to, and having no way of telling anyone you won't be back for a while. So here we go. She's addressing the loss of her sister, the loss of her background, the loss of even more, and the wisdom of her mother as she's taking it in. Then, after sharing more memories of their youth together, the narrator ends her letter with a description of a call from Winnipeg, Manitoba, their childhood city. The caller asks if she remembers how green the Providence of Manitoba. Yeah, I said, I know. It's an amazing green. I remember now. Then the story leaps without a sign-off to recounting the time when the two sisters, Yoli, who I haven't named yet, the one who's writing, and Elf, traveled together by plane and are lying in a hotel bed remembering life events. Remember when we watched the solar eclipse? I asked her. You came to my school and dragged me out of Gunner's English class to watch it with you. Yes, she said. I was so cold. Well, it was winter, and we were lying in the snow in a field, wearing welding helmets, she said. Weren't we? Where did you get them from? I can't remember. I guess some guy I knew in town. Wasn't it amazing? I asked her. The eclipse? It really was, she said. The path of totality. What? I said. Is that what it's called? Yeah, remember what Dad said? She dropped her voice. The path of totality passed over Manitoba in the early afternoon. Oh, right, you mean what he said when he said that in the super serious tone? It was so funny, she laughed. The next one's not supposed to be for another 1,500 years or something like that, I said. Then I guess I will too. Maybe not, said Elf. Who knows? There was a skylight over our bed, and we could see the stars. Elfie to my hand. She put it on her heart, and I felt its strong and steady beat. We had an early appointment the next morning. Elf said it was like getting married or writing an exam. It's torture to have to wait all day, she said. Let's just get up, shower, and go. I am stunned by the beauty of this passage of back and forth conversation. I feel at once the flying that Auntie Tina predicted, the idea that things might just be what they are and we have to let them go, and the love and healing that goes on in grief. The beings of the two sisters are so clearly evoked, the magical thinking of Elf, the following nature of the younger sister Yoli, and of course the way being in the path of totality alludes to the largeness of the universe in which grief or no grief, we are small, very small. And I want to add here that you notice the shift from you to she. This ending of this letter begins with a memory that Yoli is sharing with her deceased sister, Elf or Elfrida. And then she changes it to she, almost as if she's writing a new ending. And it is a new ending. They do go to Zurich in this ending. And what that was about in the book, I think I'll leave for you to read it. But it was very important, and Yoli felt very bad about not doing it. So she writes her way into being able to create a story in which she did do it. And when I go back to the title, All My Puny Sorrows, I am believing both in deep sorrow and in the ability to process grief and carry the beloveds with us under this sun. Not only that, but the ability of the deceased to impart their spirit and assure us that we will be well. And so I end this book really, really with a loop back to the beginning where the sisters had their fun laughing at their father, where their father seemed more connected to the house than anybody else, where he did not know where it was going, just like we are in life, don't know where we're going and have to go back in the dark to find out where we've been. It's a beautiful story. I hope this little talk on endings helps you understand what you have to do at the beginning to get to an ending that's profound, that lets us not want to leave these characters, that lets us feel something, that lets us know that, at least for one of them, in this case, life goes on, and in the other case, for the author, life goes on in the characterization of an alter ego, perhaps, Megan. Next time, part 2, we'll discuss more and we'll use some very short stories. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you, and goodbye for now.